All right, so what we're taking a look at is specifically the internal assessment related to the computer science curriculum. And what I've done is I've drawn out various examples and things from the vademecum, from previous years' examples, and actually feedback for the internal assessments. More than likely, this particular series of presentations will be based in two or three different videos. I'm not quite sure how it'll play out yet, but it'll give you an idea. The first off, we have three different requirements for the internal assessment. So number one is a cover page, and it'll be in HTML, it'll have relative hyperlinks, meaning it'll work no matter what computer you go to. The cover page is not included in the overall word count, however, it is a way for the moderator to assess your different elements. Information to access or locate the product, username, password must be provided in the cell on the cover page. And the idea is when you put together this information, if the moderator can't actually get to your stuff, they're not going to try to dig too deeply. I mean, they have lots of these to go for. They might communicate with the high school where it actually came from. I would like to think they would, but it is not a hide and seek. We want this to be as obvious, open, and readily available and accessible to the moderators as possible. The second section is the product, and then we have the documentation, including a video, which must be less than 7 minutes, and we go into that a little bit in the internal assessment feedback from the actual moderators. Now, what I've done is I have an internal assessment cover page, and you'll notice that Computer Science Internal Assessment 4, and it'll have the candidate session number, and this whole form is listed, but this is in HTML. And each one of these items was such as planning, design, development, functionality, evaluation, and design specifically related to the appendices. If you click on these, you'll actually come up with a PDF document. For instance, this is our PDF on Criterion A. And it actually goes through elements that are necessary for Criterion A. Now, when we're actually putting this together, we're going to go more into it. But for instance, if I take a look at my organization of document, where it has a description of the scenario, rationale for proposed product, success criteria for the product, if I look in here's my rationale for proposed solution, evidence of consultations, success criteria. In each one of these cases, this corresponds directly to my breakdown of the actual criteria. So I have something called the record of tasks, and if I look over here, if I look in my cover page, there's my record of tasks. Then I have a section called design, and if I look in my design overview, which has, and then developing of the product, if I look over here, and then I have development. Each one of the criteria that are listed in the way it's supposed to break down correspond directly to the way the criteria is listed on the cover page. We're trying to remove doubt as to where this information is and how readily accessible this information is. So we have the functioning product, video 2 to 7 minutes in length, extensibility of the product, functionality, extensibility of product, looking at it through this video, evaluation of the product, extended writing, recommendation for improving the product, and these are in section E, and then the appendices. And once again, if I go back here, you've got evaluation and appendices. So we're all good where that's concerned. All right, so let's kind of continue from there. Development of solutions. Students are advised to use the following guidelines to develop a solution. This will ensure fulfill the requirements of the assessment criteria. Prior to developing the product, the teacher must have approved the choice of client, advisor, and scenario, reviewed preliminary designs and checked that the templates provided in a zip file are being used, proposed timeline for completing the product is realistic, scope and nature of the product as appropriate. So what goes on is, as we go to development of solution, we start working with, for instance, Criterion A, planning. The following key questions should be considered. Who is the client advisor? Is the choice of client advisor appropriate? Why is a product being developed? When you start to put together your internal assessment, you don't just randomly throw it out there. You have to actually come up with a reason why this is needed. What is the importance of this particular product? So, for instance, if I look into our criterion A, it says the client is a local Boy Scout troop leader, Shelley Sally. The client and I meant to discuss the issue as we experienced in involvement Boy Scout. Shelley serves as a mentor of sorts, and it goes through and it justifies why it's actually going into these different elements and why they're actually needing a database. So the student has to actually go out and find a client and create a database using, and we use, though I use the term database, we use the OOP section, or the Object-Oriented Programming section, and then create a database within it, because the database lends itself well to all the elements of our particular criteria. And it goes into the rationale for proposed solution, and it's going right down the list. It says, who is a client advisor? We know that. Why is this appropriate? What is the rationale for proposed solution? And we're looking right through criterion A here. It says the rationale behind the choice for proposed product must be an extended writing with reference to the student's consultations with client or advisor, justifying how the choice of this particular product is an effective solution. Before reaching a decision for the proposed product, the student and or computer science teacher must determine if the student has a technical skill, whether the client's hardware and software is compatible, if the data required for the product can be obtained, and how there are any security implications. Success criteria. The success criteria that are evaluated in criterion E should be listed in the form of bullet points. If the student is a client, they must have an advisor who can review the success criteria. It's better, and, well, honestly, I'll make you have an actual client. So when we look at the example of our criterion A, we have our rationale for proposed solution. We have our evidence of consultation. Now, when we look at the internal assessment feedback, they recommended that a lot of the rationale, well, not the rationale, but the evidence of consultation was actually in the appendix. However, we're going to play with that as we go along and see. We'll look more at those elements as we go along. All right, so here's our success criteria. Let us continue from here. So let's continue with our solution overview. A record of tasks in the zip file must be used for a product proposed in criterion A. You'll notice it's always going to be relating back to criterion A. So in your actual writing, you need to make sure that you are specifically referencing things that you talked about in criterion A, to the point where if you have enumerated elements in criterion A, if you have hyperlinks going back and forth from criterion B to criterion A, anything to imply to the grader that there is a continuity of thought between A and B. It says the record of tasks form addresses a chronology of the key events in planning, designing, developing, testing, and implementing the solution. So what the record of tasks is actually doing is showing the advancement of thought as you go through all the different elements involving your product development. Any other issues may arise that may affect the development of the solution, but it is basically you recording your thought process. The design overview should include design methodologies appropriate to the type of product being designed, different levels of draft design such as the overall structure and the internal layout of the product itself. This can include investigation of specific elements used with the product, such as classes, subclasses, tables, queries, style sheets, graphic elements, effects. Evidence of a testing plan that addresses the main areas of functionality of the product. Now, your evidence of testing plan is absolutely important, and the student must submit a final version of the record of task form and a design overview. However, the teacher will need to see earlier versions to determine whether the product proposed is appropriate and feasible. So what that might look like as an example as you're going through. So let's pull up our record of tasks and our overall design. And so here's our record of tasks. Task number 1, planned action, planned outcome. So meet with the client, gather specifics, have a general plan for program, time estimated, target completion date. Now, a lot of times when you're going through this record of tasks, you're not going to be able to have this all complete, because what's going to happen is parts of these elements will be due, like your beginning of record of tasks will be due before your actual program is all the way done. So you'll leave some blanks, and I perfectly understand that, but this is where you start to document how you're actually going through this bad boy and what you're figuring out as you do so. Now, the way I actually grade things is I'll have you do section A, turn in section A. do section A and B, redo section A based on my feedback, and then turn in A and B. And then you get scores as each way. So it's very important that you hit those particular due dates, because what happens is if you don't hit the due dates, you don't get the feedback. You don't get the feedback, you can't then change it to raise your grade. So it's very intertwined, so you have to make sure you're getting all this involved. So let's take a look at criterion B. So the overall design and solution. So what's going on right here is I have a flow chart that's actually determining how the actual program will go through from start, the different elements that will yes, no, all the different elements involved in this particular item. But notice this is a largesse view of how this is going to work, with not a lot of specifics involved except for the general idea of how the program is going to work and how it's going to interact. And then you might get down to the individual menus. So right here you have your Scouts menu, and then this is the individual Scouts menu. And then you might have different menus involved with your badges menu, and then somewhere here I'm hoping there's a badges menu section. And then this gives you an overall idea of this is the way it's going to work. So now we got to start talking about the development process. So this is where the basic stages, these are our root menus, database structures, and it goes through the different elements, kind of ticking them off, how she's going to develop and what she's going to develop. And then you get down to the testing plan. So you get the testing type, what you're going to test, then the nature of the test itself, and the example data input-output, what data you're going to put in, specifics, what your expectation is, and what actually comes out in the long run. Now, a lot of these, not a lot, all of these testing plan items should relate back to proving your success criteria. Because what's going on is we want to, if we set success criteria that tells us how we specifically accomplish a program, and then our testing plan doesn't support that success criteria, why the heck did you come up with the testing plan to begin with? Or how are you actually going to determine whether or not it's successful if your success plan has nothing to do with how you're going to test it? That's like installing a door in the house that you never go through, and the success of the house is based off whether or not the door works. If no one ever opens the door, and your success is based off of whether or not the door opens, you can't judge your success. So as you're going through this, make absolutely positively sure your success criteria and your testing plan coincide, so you'll be able to test your success, so to speak. All right. Our criterion C, development. The product must be compatible with the information criterion A and B. Once again, we are making sure there's a complete continuity of information as it connects from A to B and B to C. The student must present a list of the techniques used in developing the product. The techniques must include algorithmic thinking, data structures, software tools, user interfaces. This list need not be exhaustive, but should illustrate how the major components of the product were developed. The students must provide evidence of algorithmic thinking. The information in the development of the document must provide a detailed account using extended writing and other appropriate information to explain the following: to structure the product and why it is appropriate, the algorithmic thinking used in development of the product, the techniques used in development of the product and reasons why they are appropriate. This may include screenshots, exemplar data, references to information. Any existing tools that use in development of the product, such as code libraries, software packages, web hosting, security information. Any reference materials such as templates, program code, applets, or other materials that have been used or modified must be acknowledged in this section. The code used in a product can be included in the appendix itself. So, if I'm taking a look here, and we're looking at criterion C in our internal assessment, and I go down to our, should be in our development. Let's open this bad boy right here. So here's our criterion C. This talks about techniques using our class structures. I might actually get code from the class structures itself. Shows the fields. Then I talk about how, in this particular case, you're using hash tables, overflow indices and hash tables, sorting arrays. It goes through all these different items that were used and explains this is a user interface. This is the way it's going to look like. This is what's involved in it. Criterion C usually comes after the program is made. Indentation. How did the indentation work? How do my borders work? This is a by-step breakdown of what you used and why. outside sources I am using, all the different items. Some of these items were actually included in Appendix I, the appendices, so people can look them up. Different algorithms that were involved in the creation of this item. Searching, number badges. I mean, all of this is a breakdown of the algorithmic thinking. These are all screenshots, so it can clearly indicate how these things go together, as well as a word count at the end of every section. Look to Section B.